Articulation of the trunk. All bones of the trunk join together in several ways, also related and joined to the skeleton of the head and to the skeleton of the upper limb and lower limb. Also, function of the trunk is protection of inner organ and also form an axis of our body. That some parts of the trunk is hardly unmovable. That's why the human body, the actual skeleton, has a lot of Hemiarthrosis. The first example of joint between the bones of the trunk, example of joint between the vertebral column and first one is syndesmosis, like example is like membranes and ligaments, synchondrosis, permanent and temporary, synastosis, hemiarthrosis like option, and diarthrosis between the vertebras, between the occipital bone and vertebral column, and between the vertebras and the ribs, and lastly between the ribs and sternum. The review of connection between the vertebras is in the similar way as all connections between the bones. First of all, it is syndesmosis. Example of syndesmosis on the vertebral column is anterior longitudinal ligament, ligamentum longitudinale anterior, which connect all vertebral bodies on arterial surface together with the intervertebral disc. Second ligament is posterior. To describe better connections between the vertebras, we need to describe the one link between the three vertebras. First of all, syndesmosis. They are anterior longitudinal ligament, which connect anterior aspects of the bodies of the vertebrae in this way and prevent hypermobility backward. Second one, posterior longitudinal ligament. Posterior longitudinal ligament connect vertebral bodies from posterior surface and prevent hypermobility to the front or hyperflexion of the vertebral column. Ligamenta flava. Yellow ligament which located posterior wall of the vertebral canal. Also, intertransverse ligament between the transverse processes of the lumbar vertebrae, and interspinous and supraspinous ligaments between the spinous process. All of these ligaments, hypermobility of the vertebral column, permanent synchondrosis, which call it intervertebral disc. Intervertebral disc between the bodies of vertebra, which consists of the annulus fibrosus and nucleus pulposus. The function of this disc is to separate two vertebrae and join them in one link and serve as shock absorption and some spring between the vertebral bodies through joint between the vertebrae. It is zygoapophyseal joint between the articular processes of the joint. This joint is simple, not complex, combined. Simple because formed by the superior and inferior articular surfaces of the vertebrae together and has no any accessory auxiliary apparatus. Also works together with neighbor and ligaments which make it stronger. All previous ligaments and tough capsule of this joint together with and tough capsule of this joint. Sometimes inside of this joint appears a meniscoid-like structure which works as a receptor of distance between the two articular surfaces. So we need to join the vertebral column to the head. Place of relationship between the vertebral column and head is occipital-atlantal relationship. They are condylar process of the occipital bone. They related with atlas and also work in one link with C2 with epistrophe. These joints which works together in one combination of movement to provide movement of the head together with the movement of the neck. That's why occipital bone attached to the atlas attached to the axis. First joint, Atlanta-occipital joint. Atlanta-occipital joint is bicondylar, biaxial, simple, not complex, combined. Articular surfaces of this joint is condylar process, condylate process of the occipital bone and superior articular surfaces of the atlas. as you remember, superior articular surfaces of the atlas and condylar process. Movements which possible in this joint is flexion and extension, movements of the head, flexion and extension, and lateral rotation, movements to the side. Next joint of this region is atlantoaxial joint. Atlantoaxial joint formed by the three joints. First joint, which is paired, it is lateral atlantoaxial joint between the lateral masses of the atlas and superior articular surfaces of the second cervical vertebra. This joint is facet, simple, not complex, combined. Movements which can be found in this joint is sliding movements to any position, to any axis, to the side, to each directions. This joint is multiaxial. Second, unpaired joint, but called central. Here you can see it. Formed by the dens of the epistrophe and formed by atlas, fovea dens, but also formed by the ligament which surround it. That's why it has three articular surfaces. First on the tooth, second on the facet, and third one behind of it on the ligament. That's why this joint is compound, not complex, combined, and uniaxial, because shape of this joint is pivot or cylindric and has only one type of movement. It is movements to the sides. Movements to the sides. Okay, and last question for this link to joining the head to the trunk is ligaments. First of all, ligament which protect this region is nuchus ligament, which extend from the external occipital crest until or spinous process of the cervical region. Second one is atlanto-occipital membrane in two examples, anterior and posterior. Second one, lateral atlanto-occipital ligament, tectorial membrane inside of the, and seam ligaments which is common for all vertebral column. It is posterior longitudinal, anterior longitudinal ligaments, yellow ligament of the vertebral column. But if we reduce the occipital bone inside of this joint, we will see the cruciate-like structure below the tectorial membrane. That is, transverse ligament of the atlas, longitudinal band of the cruciate ligament. That's why it's cruciate ligament. Below it, you will see the alar ligament, ligamentum alaris, between the tooth-like process, between the dens of the epistrophe and occipital bone, and apical ligament of the dens between the apex and atlas and occipital bone. All these ligaments form the one link of movement for the movement of the head, together with movements of cervical division of vertebral column. And last link of this topic is joining between joints of the thoracic cage. The main link, the main joints and articulation on this region will be appears in two regions. First, between the vertebral column and rib, and second, between the rib and sternum. As you remember, we have 12 pairs of ribs, and they classificate as true, false, and floating. That means all true ribs articulate with the vertebral column in two places. First, in the first joint, which calls articulatio capitis costae. Articulatio capitis costae, between the head of the rib and two or one vertebras. Second joint is between the tubercle of the rib and the transverse process of the vertebra. The floating ribs does not form this type of joint. Floating ribs has no transverse articulation. Articulation between the rib and the sternum. The first rib form the through synchondrosis. All other ribs except false and floating form the direct trosis between the rib and cartilage and sternum, and false ribs form the synchondrosis with the rib which is located above. and floating ribs does not relate with sternum. Articulatio capitis costae. Common characteristic for this joint is compound, not complex, combined, and facet or plane. These joints, except joints of the 10s, 11s, and 12s also and first ribs, are compound, means they are formed by the hemifacet of the superior vertebra on the body, hemifacet of the vertebra of the inferior vertebra, and form the two joints which fuse in one. These joints is not separate joints because they are located in one capsule. Second joint is ligament articulatio costotransversalis. This joint is simple, not complex, combined, plain joint. And ligaments which make it stronger. First, it is radiate ligament which fuse in large complex with capsule of this joint. Second is costotransverse ligament, costotransversal ligament between the transverse process and rib. Next one is lateral costotransversal ligament between the transverse process and tubercle of the rib. Okay, next, connection between the sternum and rib. This type of connection calls as diarthrosis, and also this type of joint forced by radiate sternocostal ligament which form the sternal membrane. The trunk has several types of joints between the vertebras and head, vertebras and thorax. This all type of bones has mostly all present type of articulation, such as synchondrosis, which is ligaments anterior longitudinal, posterior longitudinal, ligamentum flava, and ligaments between the parts of the vertebra, intertransversal, interspinous, supraspinous ligament. Has synchondrosis, temporary, located between the different parts of the bones and fuse in one. For example, synchondrosis of the sacrum, which fuse in synostosis later. Permanent synchondrosis is intervertebral disc and articulation between the first rib and sternum. Hemiarthrosis can be found between the fifth lumbar vertebra and sacrum after some condition, for example, aging, because this synchondrosis develop the gap inside and become hemiarthrosis. And diarthrosis examples. Diarthrosis examples present between the vertebrae and ribs in two places, means two joints, except 11 and 12. Between the vertebrae, zygapophyseal joints. Between the occipital bone and atlas. Between the atlas and axis, and last one between the ribs and sternum. Also, however, the sacrum is a separate bone. That's why this region also has separate type of joint, lumbosacral joints.